participants of the webinar on sustainability assessment of electric vehicles, opportunities and challenges. On behalf of TERI, I and Deepa would like to welcome you all to this event. With the automotive industry on the cusp of a major electric transition, this webinar aims to address the increasingly important topic of sustainability assessment of electric vehicles. Before we move on, let's start with some housekeeping rules announcements. We would like to inform all participants that the entire event is being recorded and will be posted in the Digital Library of Green Mobility website, which is greenmobility-library.org. The link will be shared with all participants. Would request the panelists to kindly switch on their videos and unmute themselves when participants are requested to please post their questions related to the webinar topic on the chat box. We have received several questions during the registration process also, which will be taken up by the chair during the panel discussion. I now request Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General TERI, to give the opening address.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Well, so I welcome all of you for this particular meeting. And really speaking, I should say that we have reached the stage that you really don't have to convince anyone that the present state of whatever we are doing, including transport, is not healthy. It's not going to take us very far. And therefore, there is a need that the global community, they need to come together and implement several measures to mitigate the present GHG emissions. And automobile industry, the way the number of vehicles is going up, if you look at Delhi a few years back, we thought, do we really need metro? And maybe once metro is ready, the traffic on the roads will decrease and so on. But today the scenario is that earlier this week, I came from Jaipur and I was stuck in Gurgaon and I felt, my God, what would have been the state of affairs if there was no metro? And it was almost 11 o'clock at night. And I reached past midnight and all the way there was so much of traffic. And that essentially means that we are depending more and more on automobiles, on using our own cars and so on. And that essentially means that this is one sector where we really have to look into what are the options available. Can we move away, transit from the internal combustion engine cars to the electric vehicles? Will that be the best decision? And integrated decision making is perhaps prerequisite for decarbonizing the transport system in an economically viable manner. And this entails bringing multiple agencies together on a common knowledge platform that will benefit the diverse stakeholders in the entire EV ecosystem to gain knowledge. This sets the basis for the digital library on green mobility, which is the result of collaborative effort of GIZ and TERI under India component of GIZ's Nationally Determined Contributions Transport Initiative for Asia project. In India, there are over 0.5 million electric two-wheelers and a few thousand electric cars today, which is less than 1% of the annual vehicle sales. However, industry has the potential to grow more than 5% in a few years. And this is owing to policy incentives like 100% FDI in the sector and schemes like faster adoption and manufacturing of hybrid and electric vehicles. More recently, the production-linked incentive schemes for automobile sector was launched to encourage domestic production of batteries to support the EV industry, which requisite infrastructure and reductions in costs. Such a rapid transition poses both opportunities and challenges in front of the Indian economic and social sector. Increased number of electric vehicles would reduce the pressure and demand of petrol and diesel, thereby helping us to reduce our import bills for an exchange. EV manufacturing is also likely to generate substantial employment in the country, and thus this transition of e-mobility is seen as a one-shot solution to multiple problems plaguing India currently, including air pollution, climate change mitigation, oil imports, and unemployment to some extent. An excellent case of contribution to the economy from the EV sector has already been demonstrated during the pandemic. While the global automotive industry was negatively affected due to COVID-19 pandemic, the global electric car rose 70% in 2020. However, such opportunities are not without challenges. From an environment perspective, EVs are the preferred option due to their reduced use phase emission. However, there is no holistic sustainability assessment done for EV in India, and EV manufacturing involves use of critical minerals like lithium and other rare earths, which are highly energy and resource intensive. Additionally, the electricity used for charging the EV batteries has high share of thermal-based generation. If the environmental footprint of these factors are to be considered, the benefits of EV may not be as high as perceived. And we keep on reading in the newspaper, someone saying that, or rather the reports mentioning that EV are not environment friendly, and lots will depend on how the electricity is generated. And are we ready for this transition of N number of cars in next 5 years, because that electricity is also to be provided. And the need that, is it the LCA analysis which is required to do this study? And also, will we have these rare elements in the quantities that we are looking forward to for EV manufacturing? And we are also looking at the requirement for the infrastructure, which is going to be huge for all the countries which are going to use EV. And another point of concern is that everything is created, and maybe tomorrow there are other disruptive technologies like hydrogen. And in that case, what is going to happen to all the investments which will be made in creating that infrastructure? So that's again something which must be studied carefully. Well, as I said, that what we essentially need to do, or one of the most effective tools of sustainability assessment, is life cycle assessment, or what we commonly call as LCA analysis. And it is a systematic analysis of potential environmental impacts of products or services during their entire lifetime. And like for EV, all we use in the generation of the car itself, how environment friendly it is, and till the end, that how do you discard whatever is the leftover. There has been to date several LCA studies done on EVs globally, but none in the case of India. LCA can also be coupled with hotspot analysis tool for targeted interventions to improve EV performance, particularly in stages where it is lagging. The other sustainability assessment tools are social impact assessment that might help to forecast long-term impacts of EV penetration in Indian villages and other harsh terrains like mountainous and desert areas, with their spillover implications on economy and social factors like human health and education. The need is for an integrated sustainability assessment for EVs incorporating environmental and socio-economic factors to help generate relevant data and fill existing knowledge gaps through robust results and foolproof policies. So with these words, I welcome you all to the meeting, and I have a request to make that please make it as interactive as possible, because at the end of the day, we want to hear ideas. We want to collate ideas from all of you and move forward in this journey of electric vehicles. Thank you so much. Well, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dhawan, for the welcome remarks and putting forth the remarks on opportunities and challenges that the sector is facing today. Our next speaker, for the next special address, I would request Ms. Urta Ashost, Project Director, NDC-TIA GIZ, to kindly deliver a special address.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. So the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia-India component works on many pillars of EV deployment. And Dr. Dhawan has already painted a very comprehensive picture of the latest developments in India, so I don't want to speak more about this. But one important aspect of EV deployment, of course, is resource efficiency. And we want to take a more comprehensive look at sustainable transport. So even at the outset, our focus is a lot on decarbonizing the transport sector, but that's, of course, just one aspect of sustainable mobility. So looking beyond carbon and looking at the full footprint of electric vehicles versus internal combustion engines will provide us with a fuller picture. So we're very, very glad to collaborate with TERI on this LCA analysis. And this analysis is really one of the first of its kind of a cradle-to-cradle analysis of an Indian EV model. So our objective of this study is really to, on the one hand, better understand the sustainability of the EV ecosystem in India and how it compares to the sustainability of internal combustion engines. And this is also to have a more informed conversation. As was mentioned, there's a lot of discussion and debate also in the news about the final sustainability of EVs. So we hope to shed some more light on this with this study and contribute thereby to evidence-based policy making. Secondly, we expect this study to provide initial input that is policy relevant and provide a little bit of directive for circular economy and afterlife use of batteries as well. So can the study deliver inputs and values regarding the minimum recycling values, for instance, of certain materials such as rare earth materials. And so we hope that this even small study will still be able to contribute to this policy discussion that is really required. And it could also help us understand which interventions will have the largest sustainability benefits, because we also cannot do it all at the same time. So we are hoping to see where are the largest impacts really, and what is the benefit of recycling, and where can it have the largest benefit really for the industry and for the society overall. All of this is happening against the backdrop of resource efficiency being a strategic priority in India. But not just that, it's also happening against the backdrop of international discussions that are giving more and more importance to overall supply chain sustainability in the automotive industry. So here too, I believe that having a better understanding of the sustainability of the different steps of the supply chain of EVs will contribute to this international discussion and will prepare also India for entering into this debate and for long-term sustainability also of this, I think, emerging market and business opportunity in the country. So last but not least, out of this work, we'll have an Excel tool that we will make publicly available so that we can continue to work and others can also continue to work on this important topic. And we're very glad to have this opportunity today to bring together experts and stakeholders working in this space and further the discussion on this still relatively untapped topic of life cycle analysis of electric vehicles in India. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the presentations and the discussion afterwards.
Thank you, Ms. Ashos, for a very informative address. I would now request Mr. Siddharth Sinha, Public Policy Consultant at NITI Aayog, to kindly deliver his special address.
Thank you, madam. It's very, very good to be part of this panel and this wonderful event here today. And it's very good to see Urda as well. In fact, yesterday there was a discussion at NITI Aayog and Urda was there yesterday. And I think now there's one more which is happening on Monday. So there's lots of discussions in the clean mobility spectrum that are happening across, of late. But I must, commend you for choosing the topic that you've chosen today, because modeling and integrated decision making has increasingly become very important, for the transport ecosystem in India. Because as we all know, the transport sector in itself contributes to about 14% of India's total carbon emissions. And within these 14%, about 90%, 85 to 90% of them at least come from the road sector, and this road sector, especially within the cities, but more so on the highways where you've got the heavy vehicles, which are frankly one of the most polluting forms of transportation. Of course, over time, the government has taken different initiatives to decarbonize transport. You've got the National Mission for Transformative Mobility. We had then which rolled out the FAME-1 scheme. Then the scheme was revised. Now you've got the FAME-2 scheme. And as Vibhaji pointed out, there's also the PLI scheme, which encourages production of not just components for EVs, but clean mobility in general. So even for green hydrogen vehicles, that PLI scheme is as useful as it is to the EV side of things. And apart from e-mobility, there's a range of other things that the government is doing, whether it's the ambitious goal of decarbonizing the railways, which is also essentially part of our commitments to the intended NDCs, as well as the other work that's happening across the spectrum, whether it's the dedicated freight corridors, which will completely decarbonize the railway freight movement, at least for a start. And otherwise also you've got regional mobility projects like the RRTS, which is the Regional Rapid Transit System, which is coming up between Delhi and Meerut. The second phase is between Delhi and Alwar. And as Vibha Madam had pointed out right at the start, this whole thing of being stuck in traffic jams in Gurgaon, that used to be the case with Meerut also at some point in time. But over the next 5 to 6 years, we'll have high-speed regional rails which are running between these cities, which will really take about the estimates will take about 100,000 vehicles off-road. That was a study which we undertook back in 2018. But coming back to the topic, I believe the LCA modeling approach is very important because it's something that's cradle to grave. In this case, it'll be cradle to cradle. So there's an element of circularity. But this is also important because just after yesterday's discussion, we were speaking with the honorable member of NITI Aayog, that's Dr. V.K. Saraswat, and we were just discussing exactly how an LCA modeling is required to understand what's happening really with the EVs and how do they compare with, let's say, plug-in hybrids, or how do they compare with a greater ethanol blending that's taking place, because we've also achieved our ethanol blending target ahead of the deadline, and now the next goal is to touch 20%. So we really have to be comparing all of these with each other, and it's important to understand that it's very important to decarbonize the grid as well, as long as your fundamental source of energy is electricity. So that is also something that needs to be seen, and that fundamental source, not electricity, but the way in which it is generated, which is predominantly thermal, unless that matrix also changes, we haven't really made that amount of progress as much as we desire it to be. So that's a really important element, and that is where this kind of integrated decision making would help us. So we need to understand the status quo, right? That based on how much our grid is decarbonized, based on how much of energy consumption actually goes into these critical minerals which are now required, which are basically required for battery components. Till then, it is very tough to actually go ahead and say that no, this really is the only way that should be forward. So there is an element of integrated decision making that's supposed to be required. And one additional advice to on this front would be that International Transport Forum ITF is one of NITI Aayog's project partners for the NDC-TIA project as well, which Urda mentioned. And ITF actually for the last 2 years, they've been working on this modeling exercise where what they're basically doing is they're building an LCA model to basically simulate how transport policies would feed into our emission commitments in terms of what we've stated our NDCs to be. So this project is currently in its second year. This project also feeds into the final output of this project actually feeds into the NDC-TIA project, which Urda is heading at the global level, of course. So this is something that can also be explored because they already have a lot of data that's available. And perhaps at some point, we also have to look at standardization and integration of data, because as a policymaker, I can say that the biggest challenge in India is that data is all over the place. It is not standardized. It is not reported in the same format. And without this, it's difficult to carry out the simulations that we need to really carry out. And finally, on the concluding note, I would really like to congratulate TERI for putting together the National Digital Library on on clean mobility. This is really a big thing, and over time, the number of viewers, the number of people who are actually using this library is increasing. In fact, just the other day, I was having a conversation with some of my colleagues at G20, and in fact, they have also been visiting your particular library and that's really important given the fact that India is going to be taking over the G20 presidency in the next 2.5 months. Really, thank you so much to TERI for putting this together as part of the NDC-TIA program, and really allowing policymakers and urban planners and transport planners to converge on the same platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha, for the very thought-provoking address, and also for your kind words for the DLGM platform. I would now request Mr. Shouvik Bhattacharya, Senior Fellow and Associate Director, Resource Efficiency and Governance Division, TERI, to provide an overview on sustainability assessment of EVs.
Thanks. I will just share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
So first of all, thank you so much for the initial interventions and basically kind of setting the context for today's webinar on sustainability assessment of electric vehicles, opportunities and challenges. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present some of our initial findings and from the assessment that we are doing under the project that was discussed, undertaking a kind of a sustainability assessment for various kind of vehicles, particularly like electric vehicles and IC vehicles, and where we are in terms of our analysis, what is left, and how these findings would kind of complement and support some of the existing strategies as well as future strategies that are imperative towards decarbonizing the Indian transport sector. Now, as mentioned that in the road transportation sector almost contributes to 85 to 90% of the total emission in the transport sector, and hence the road transport sector is going to play a very important role in decarbonizing the overall transport sector as well as meeting the 2070 net zero goals. So as we move on towards the decarbonization processes, there would be newer technologies, and but at the same time, these technologies will have its own set of challenges, particularly from the perspective of capital investment, research and development, their efficiency, the kind of infrastructure that are needed to, in fact, scale up those technologies, and even bringing the necessary human resources, which can support the entire transition and making it kind of commercially viable. So it is important that all these kind of issues are taken into conjunction rather than like working on specific areas, because unless and until we look at the entire picture from the entire value chain perspective as well as on the issues, I think the entire transition won't be able to like really see the kind of expectations that we all have. Now, given that, definitely there is a lot of incentives and policy announcements made by the government after we have seen very ambitious targets announced during the last COP, and some of the policies have already been like kind of highlighted by Dr. Dhawan, which include some of these, including the biofuel blending with the petrol, rapid rollout of the FAME2, and it has been like really successful in terms of providing incentives to the consumers for faster adoption of electric vehicles, the hydrogen, the CNG vehicles that have been introduced in 2020, the hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle-based EVs, and the SATAT scheme, which is again, although not purely electric vehicles, but we are trying to capture how biogas-based fuel can substitute the imported natural gas and kind of be a kind of a critical fuel to run that can be used to run the IC vehicles. Now, one of the most important elements regarding these various technologies is to what extent they influence or support the larger goals that have been identified in decarbonizing the sector. Every technology has its own financial implications. It will have its own environmental implications. So the system boundary of this entire analysis is largely looking at the environmental aspects along the entire life cycle stages. And when I say life cycle stages, it is from cradle to cradle by bringing in the end of life management as well. So as most of you may be aware of, that life cycle is a standardized tool announced way back almost like 2 to 3 decades ago, which provides a kind of a framework for reporting robust results around 18 environmental categories, starting from global warming, potential water consumption, fossil mineral usage, acidification, eutrophication, ecotoxicity, etc. And obviously, because of the paucity of time, I'm not going into the details of what life cycle assessment tools are and to what extent they are kind of used across various automotive sector applications. But yes, just a kind of an overview in terms of how broadly it works, what are the assumptions we have considered, what are the quality control checks that are needed in terms of ensuring that the results that are generated from these exercises are like robust and have credibility in terms of influencing and coming up with really a decision, a data based information. So this presentation that I'm going to make is primarily on the comparative assessment of the electric vehicles and the IC vehicles, which has been like undertaken as a part of the larger NDC-TIA project with GIZ as the lead. So if we look at the life cycle assessment, there are 4 major entities. The first one is the goal and the scope definition. And then we have the inventorization, where we identify once the system boundary and the relevant indicators, what kind of data that needs to be compiled so that they are analyzed, and which subsequently provides the impact assessment results. And those are across various indicators. They are interpreted, and opportunities or hotspot areas are identified, which gives us a kind of prioritization of intervention areas that can be taken care of either at the policy level, or it can be at the commercial level, or maybe at the consumer level. So, in terms of its applications, we see its use largely for strategic planning, product development, more importantly, policy changes for which we have kind of gathered here today. Also in the marketing space and influencing consumer decisions, and definitely like on other softer issues which may go beyond these 4 or 5 application areas. If we look at the literature in the context of the sustainability assessment of various fuel technologies, we know that it may be very difficult to find any kind of relevant literature in the Indian context. So most of the studies that have been undertaken till date try to capture the impact in the developed world. Few in China, definitely, and but very limited in India. But largely, most of these studies have used secondary data, and that's where this particular study is different from the existing studies, is that we are trying to provide as much as or compile as much as primary data from the different stakeholders. So you can see from the literature that the EVs, in fact, have a significant benefits, but again, their benefits in terms of its environmental sustainability is dependent on a number of factors that include the total range that the vehicles can have per charge, the kind of grade mix that are being considered, and obviously like the recent paper by Professor Agarwal from IIT Kanpur and his colleagues, they have talked about the time of the day charging also, because the grid mix changes during the day and the time depending on the availability of renewable energy. So that plays a very important role. And but you can see, and also we have whatever little we have analyzed from the global review, very little have been emphasized or like analyzed appropriately to capture the end of life management practices, because the ultimate circularity from, if we are talking about from cradle to grave to cradle kind of an analysis, this is the most important element of bringing the entire aspects of decarbonization, including circularity and import dependency reduction. So I think that is something which would play a very important role. But the real challenge is in terms of identifying the right set of technologies, the right set of data, and because these are still quite nascent, although there are few companies who have matured many of these technologies, but many of these metallurgical processes are quite at its nascent stage from the scalable, from the scale perspective. So if we look at the life cycle stages of the various automotive technologies, and we have kind of broadly categorized into three heads: the upstream, the middle stream, and the downstream. While in the upstream, we have the mining, the transportation, the manufacturing, including the manufacturing of at the sub-assembly as well as in the assembly level, and finally we look at the assembly. So these four elements form the upstream part of the entire life cycle stage, followed by the middle stream, which is the use phase, and then we have the downstream. So in the typical electric vehicle, the upstream would include the mining of the materials, the energy sources that are going into, in fact, the mining processes, the transportation at two levels. So for example, the mined material coming into the process facility, and when the process facility is like taken, it is actually going into the product development facility, and then it is further transported to the facility where it is being kind of assembled. Then you have energy which is used for electricity generation, manufacturing of the materials, including the additives and the related energy, component assembly and manufacturing. We all in the middle stream, I think the most important fact for the electric vehicle that determines sustainability is the emission factor of the grid mix, which we are considering for the northern India, because the assumption is here for Delhi. And in the downstream, we are considering the recycling and the reuse of the lithium-ion batteries, reuse particularly from the fact that its energy density may decrease to like say 60 to 70%, but it is still available for stationary applications, because if it goes for recycling, then definitely it to a large extent may be having implication on the wastage of resources. So recycling of other materials like rare earths, incineration and landfilling. So if we look at the primary contribution of carbon emission, okay, so let me come to that one in the subsequent slide. So internal combustion engine on engine vehicle would include the mining of the material ore, which is basically going into manufacturing the engine assembly and the sub-assembly and the transmission, the extraction of the fuel, basically the oil to tank and the tank to wheel. So most of the analysis try to focus on the tank to the wheel, tank to wheel, but oil to tank is often ignored. So we also try to capture the oil to tank so that we are able to compare apples with the electric vehicles. During the transportation phase, basically the transportation of the crude from the facilities where it is extracted and to the facility where it is kind of refined. Then the energy during the processing and the refining phase, the component manufacturing and the assemblies. During the middle streams, we have the emission factors of the petrol, diesel and CNG, which are extremely important because these also vary depending on where, in which cities they are currently running. In a congested city, it will have different emission factors compared to a relatively better cities where the road congestions or the traffic congestions are much improved and better. And then finally, we also look at the recycling of the materials post scrappage, including their incineration and landfilling. So this is the broad system boundary that we have adopted for the four-wheelers and the three-wheelers that we are analyzing in the Indian context, with Delhi as the representative city, because we will see in the subsequent slide that selection of the cities also have implications on the overall sustainability position of these vehicles. So let me go to some of the initial results that we have found by combining the upstream and the middle stream processes. Please note that here the petrol and the diesel does not include any kind of blending as of now, because there are few, because as I mentioned, this is a work in progress. There are few additional sensitivities and modifications that we would like to have, but these are some of the initial results, as you can see. The impacts have been assessed assuming a kind of a vehicle life of 160,000 kilometers. Largely, we have considered the standard which are provided by some of the EV manufacturers of guarantee or a warranty of 160,000 kilometers. So we are bringing both the EVs as well as the ICs at a kind of a platform having the same kilometer coverage. If I look at the global warming impact associated with the upstream component manufacturing for IC, petrol and diesel, it comes to around 0.22 and 0.3 tons CO2 equivalent, vis-a-vis 0.9 CO2 equivalent for the electric vehicles. And most of the impact that is associated with the production of the electric vehicles. And here, when we talk about production, we are largely taking two major components, that is the battery and the battery management system, and the electric motors. So the battery, in fact, contributes to almost 90%, or rather more than 90% of the total CO2 emission that is associated with the electric vehicle manufacturing. In case of the IC vehicles, it is much less compared to like what we see, 0.2 to 0.3 ton. So the primary contribution of carbon emission of the cathode materials comes from the upstream processes that I mentioned, and the upstream processes related to nickel, cobalt, lithium extraction and its beneficiation. So as the lithium extraction technology has not yet reached the level of industrial production, either in the developed or in the developing countries, the costs are high, and the import dependency is also high. And if we look at the largest exporter, it is like kind of still concentrated in certain countries, which is all the more making this entire situation very complicated. For example, if I look at Chile, it has the largest lithium brine resource globally, followed by Bolivia and Argentina, which is accounting for almost 80% of the world resource brine. So this concentration often poses a kind of a challenge, but nonetheless, our focus is on the environmental implication, and that is what we have estimated. So far, emissions of the petrol and diesel are concerned at 27 and 29.3 tons of CO2 equivalent, respectively, that we see over the entire vehicle lifetime, which kind of surpasses the grid-based emission of electric vehicles at 20 ton equivalent. That is for the entire vehicular life. So far, the use phase are concerned. They are calculated through a kind of a background Excel-based model using emissions from 11 factors or 11 pollutants, including carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, hydrocarbon, polymetallic hydrocarbons, the NOx, the SOx, and the benzene. So primary, the particulate matter impacts for IC is contributing in the use phase by the fuel cycle, while for the EVs, it is largely from the battery manufacturing, which is around 11.7 kilogram of particulate matter, 2.5 equivalent. Now, if I look at the water consumption again from the perspective of the water consumption for these different fuel technologies, in case of EVs, it is relatively lesser compared to the petrol and IC. diesel. But in case of the mineral resource depletion, you can see the kind of implication that electric vehicles have compared to the other two fossil fuel. Because for the EVs, it is as high as 148.9 kilogram of copper equivalent, which is the standard unit used to, in fact, present the mineral resource depletion. Now, coming to the end of life materials, what is very important is the kind of technologies that are currently used for material recovery. So if I look at the technologies that are available, it is the hydrometallurgical process, the pyrometallurgical process, and the hydro and pyrometallurgical process. While in the hydrometallurgical process, it is very much chemical driven. In the pyrometallurgical process, it is very much energy intensive. And of late, there is also hybrid process, which is relatively better compared to the hydro and the pyro. And there is also a physical process, which is very time consuming, but has the least environmental implications. So you can see that these are some of the input materials, not uniform across these different processes, but quite exhaustive in terms of its inputs going into material recovery of the product. And on the right hand side, I have kind of divided the desirable outputs and the undesirable outputs into these two color codes. So the orange ones are the one which are kind of undesirable outputs or the impacts associated with emission. And the green ones are the materials that are recovered, starting from nickel, cobalt, manganese, zinc, copper, lithium, ammonium hydroxide, the cathode material, and nickel and cobalt alloys. Now, this is not our analysis, and this is from one of the analysis that says that what are the different benefits associated with the different recycling processes. And if I see that compared to the battery production that does not include any kind of recycling, vis-a-vis recycling arising from pyrometallurgical process, hydrometallurgical process, and the physical metallurgical process, we see for the pyrometallurgical process, it reduces by 4.8% compared to no recycled content. But the highest improvement is in terms of the hydrometallurgical process, and even higher than the physical. But physical is often not considered because of its cost intensive nature. What is most important is to from the economic perspective, from the environmental perspective, is the hydrometallurgical process. But what is important for us to see is that whatever benefit that we are seeing here in terms of the environmental footprint, whether the addition of this hydrometallurgical process of material recovery would have any implications on the overall carbon footprint or the particulate matter emissions here, it may either way increase or it may either way decrease. So I think that's one of the unique value addition that we would like to have as a part of the analysis. And if we are bringing in cleaner sources of, say, natural gas or maybe biofuel blending, then obviously we will see certain reduction in the emissions happening in the petrol IC and the diesel, and bringing the EV ecosystem along with efficient recycling, whether that in fact matches with the improved emissions or not, is something that needs to be analyzed, and we would be doing it over the next 1.5 months. So from that perspective, I think it's really value adding to the fact that we would be able to get a complete picture of where these different interventions are going to work and in which way will these interventions play in terms of whether decoupling the CO2 emission in the transport sector or maybe aggravating the overall situation in a non-undesirable manner. So what are the factors that will definitely affect the EV sustainability positioning? As I mentioned, the biofuel blending and it's to the tune of 10 and 20% that may impact the competitiveness of the IC vehicles. Considering the different grid scenarios of the current 39.8% with large hydro 50% and 100%, how it is going to change. Different recycling rates for materials at the end of life, choice of technologies, and definitely battery replacement at different stages, because it may happen that the wear and tear of the battery may be faster than what has been reported. So we need to also bring in that level of sensitivities. So as we move forward, what we see as a kind of a key implication is that these findings are definitely going to drive certain recommendations and provisions under the recently announced battery waste management and handling rules, where it has talked about the recovery efficiency as well as the recycled content. So if we are able to identify which technologies are able to have the better kind of recovery and with minimal environmental impact, obviously those technologies need to be promoted with incentives that will really help decouple CO2 emission and transport sector growth, improving the range anxiety and incentivizing for enhanced recycled content, because the anticipated benefit then would be not only decreasing the cost for the producers and also the consumers and the material import dependency, and most importantly decarbonize of the transport sector. But the real challenge here is how we are going to take care of possibly the interim challenges, wherein we will continue to import, and whether the transition would be quite difficult, including renewable energy, bringing renewable energy, logistics, business networks, and contractual arrangements. So I think we need to do a kind of a combination of many of these technologies to see that as we move on, what would be the right combination of the various fuel technologies that will kind of support the decarbonized roadmap of the Indian transport sector. So before we conclude, I would like to touch upon these two aspects, the digital library on green mobility, which TERI has been doing with support from GIZ under the NDC-TIA project. It has almost more than 2,500 resources, which I think is so unique, which has also like around 13,000 users, more than 13,000 users. And the kind of views that we have received is really stupendous, almost more than 73,000 views. So in fact, that's really encouraging. And this is a kind of a small framework that we have provided. So far the life cycle assessment is concerned, we try to make it as simple as possible, and would be more than happy to receive your feedback as we move on during the course of our today's webinar. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya, for a very comprehensive overview on sustainability assessment of EVs. Now we will start with the panel discussion. One of our speakers, Dr. Mamta Mahapatra, might be joining later. She will join the panel. The panel discussion comprises a galaxy of our experts on the subject, and it is chaired by Sri Prakash, Distinguished Fellow TERI. Mr. Sri Prakash has had a long and distinguished career in Indian Railways. Positions held include Member Traffic, Indian Railway Board, and Secretary to the Government of India. At TERI, he has been leading several projects on sustainable transportation systems, railways, electric mobility, and freight transport. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Deepa. I think you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Now, this is a very comprehensive presentation that has been made by Souvik, and very educative, particularly for me, because I always thought that the electric vehicles are now the answers to the ICT. But again, that when we consider the entire ecosystem, it is only when we meet certain conditions. And that which was mentioned as that the operational life of the electric vehicle should be more than 100,000 or 150,000 kilometers. Only then it can become beneficial environmentally. Now, the three stages, the manufacturing stage, because we are talking about the battery operated electric vehicles, the manufacturing stage, yes, there will be there are many steps because the battery which we use currently, the lithium ion batteries, though the new technologies are being developed, the almost every day we keep on hearing that some of the new technologies which may come in future. But as of now, with the lithium ion batteries, which are the most popular, there are issues, and particularly about the rare materials they have, and also the process itself, which includes a lot of the carbon emission. And of course, at the operation stage, it is really much more beneficial than the ICT vehicles. But again at the disposal stage, it again causes problems and poses a lot of issues. Now, in the entire life cycle, which is being studied, that what it would look like, whether it will be really beneficial to replace all the ICT vehicles with the electric vehicles, or we should take a pause and then try to see that there should be some kind of a balance, and try to find out the new technologies which will be much more beneficial than now. And because what the future of the mobility depends only on the technology and nothing else, that the carbon emission on account of the transportation in India, it is roughly about 13.5% or 14%. But the way the mobility demand is increasing, and at a very high rate by 2050, which is only 28 years from now, the contribution of the transport sector may become as high as 19%, and which is a huge jump. And from 300 million tons, 300 million, say we go to 1.2 billion. So these kind of the development caused by the rapid economic development of the country is really unsustainable. So we have to find out the answers, and the electrification of the vehicles is one of the answers, but again with the certain conditions, as Sobik mentioned on. And we have here the distinguished experts from our research, who have done a lot of research in this area, and the activists as well, and researchers and activists who would throw more light, and then also we will have their views regarding the electrification, and then what can be done to improve the entire ecosystem. Now I request now the Dr. Jani Das, she will make a presentation, a brief presentation, and my request to all the speakers is that if they take roughly about 7 to 8 minutes only for their initial the presentations, and after that, so that I have a large number of the questions which have been sent by participants, and then we can have a good discussion, and almost if we can have 20-25 minutes for the discussions, that will be much more fruitful. Professor Das?
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Give me 1 minute. Let me share my slides, sir. Hope it's visible.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Myself, Dr. Jani Das. I am from Muthoot Institute of Technology and Science, Kerala. And I'm really very glad to be a part of this webinar on sustainability assessment of electric vehicles, opportunities and challenges by TERI. And I'm in the midst of a pool of experts, I would say, And in the presentation by Professor Sauvik, you would have noted my name, where I had done a comprehensive life cycle analysis on comparing the GHG emissions of conventional vehicles, that is internal combustion vehicles, as well as electric vehicles in the Indian context. So I suppose I'm here because of that. So thank you very much to TERI for the opportunity. So I would like to share some of the insights which I got as part of my work. So it was a single-handed work. It was a single-authored work. And I would like to share some of the research results. So during my PhD days at IIT Bombay, I was familiar with doing this life cycle assessment. So it was just a effort from my part to do a contribution, to give a contribution to the electric vehicle research going on in India. And to give, I could see that there were many literature available for such comparative analysis of GHG emissions and energy for IC vehicles and electric vehicles across the country, but I couldn't find a study for India. So that's why I thought I could work on it. So these are some of, I would like to present some of the results which I obtained as part of my research. So as mentioned earlier, life cycle analysis, it is a technique which is used to analyze the energy and environmental impacts, which are an outcome of a process that is involved in the life cycle of a particular product. So the two products which I have analyzed as part of my study are IC engines which work or which run on both petrol as well as diesel, and electric vehicles with three different battery variants. Yeah. So I have studied the life cycle boundary of a transportation technology, which I have taken is cradle to gate. I have split it into cradle to gate, then well to wheel, and end of life. So the entire life cycle analysis has been classified into these three stages, where cradle to gate mainly consists of material production and manufacturing. Well to wheel consists of the use phase, and the end of life consists of the recycling and all those things associated with the vehicle. So the material production, actually I have started from very base, that is the raw material production, then the manufacturing of the material production of the different system components. So in the case of an ICEV, we have many components like powertrain, transmission system, tires, fluids, and the main component, of course, the lead acid battery. And for an EV, we have similar systems, but we have a traction motor and a controller. And the battery, of course, is lithium-ion battery. Then we have manufacturing energy. All the components are manufactured individually, and the energy that is put in into the manufacturing sector. And then we have the well to wheel or the use phase, where actually the input for an ICV engine is fuel. So we study the energy as well as the emissions of the fuel that is used. So I've taken two different variants, as I have already mentioned. I have taken petrol and diesel. So that has been studied. And for an electric vehicle, the fuel is, of course, electricity generation, and the emissions and energy associated with that was the component of the well to wheel. And then I studied about the end of life, the energy and the emission factors, which went into the end of life of the vehicle, where the dismantling, landfilling, and recycling for both vehicle as well as the battery. So from the end of life, again, the input was given to the scrap supply of the material production, which helps in reducing the entire life cycle carbon footprint as well as energy footprint of the vehicle. So this was the life cycle boundary of the traction battery. Similar to that of our transportation technology, this was cradle to grave, as well as I've taken the end of life also. It has been shown separately. So for the any traction battery, these are some of the main parameters or main things or main components of a battery. Again, here also it has been classified into material production, manufacturing, and then the end of life, which goes into the recycling. So these are the main boundaries or life cycle boundaries which I have considered for my analysis. And one of the novelty which I would claim as part of my work was I didn't use any specific database for calculating the energy as well as emissions throughout the life cycle of the battery, but not only the battery, the vehicle. So for each of the component, the database was taken in Indian context. It was consolidated in Indian context. All the metals, components, everything It was consolidated in an Indian context. I separately dug into each component and I found out how each component was manufactured in Indian context. And for batteries like lithium, I have taken, as I have already mentioned, 3 variants of lithium ion battery. One is LFPG lithium ion phosphate, then nickel cadmium and lithium manganese oxide. So as none of these batteries are manufactured in India, I had considered the tests manufactured outside and abroad, and it has been imported to India. But the rest of the components which are manufactured in India, which are produced in India, all those values related to energy and emission were taken in Indian context. So I didn't refer to or take any specific database. Everything was done in from scrap. It was done in Excel and calculated for the Indian context. So here the life cycle emissions, GHG, the total life cycle emissions of the vehicle technology. You can see that the yellow one, the well to wheel, takes the highest factor for all the, or it contributes the highest to the total GHG emissions of all the vehicles. Of course, it is less in the case of petrol and diesel, but for the EV, it shows more. The contribution is more. The yellow bar is of course, it has the value is more. So it can see that the values are high. So as I show it in the GHG emissions, it has been quantified in terms of vehicle emission factor, which is a measure of the amount of life cycle CO2 emissions per kilometer of the vehicle. So owing to the different parameters as mentioned by Professor Sovik, some of the parameters which contribute to the highest emission factors for electric vehicles are of course, the share of fossil fuels for the generation of electricity, and that electricity is used for the use phase in electric vehicles, and the material components which are imported from outside, like battery and all those components which are imported from abroad and used in India. Of course, that increases the amount of energy consumption, life cycle energy and life cycle emission of an EV. As well as the other aspects like using more and more recycling products can improve the vehicle emission factor. Improving means bring down the vehicle emission factor. So on a life cycle perspective, if we see, though we always project electric vehicles as environment friendly and pollution free, they don't have any operational emissions associated with them, that we all know. But if we do a comprehensive life cycle analysis on an EV, and compare it with an ICEV, we can definitely say that these are my findings which I found out and which has been published in the journal. ICEV for petrol and diesel, they have comparatively less values in comparison with the EV with 3 different battery variants. So the main things or main factors which contribute to them is, of course, the generation emission of our electricity generation mix, which comes around 0.87 kg CO2 per kilowatt hour of energy that is generated, mainly contributed by coal-fired power plants. Of course, I have done a study for 2 future scenarios where more renewables can come in. So there is definitely a reduction in the emission factor by 43%. So that from that we can understand that it's more sensitive. The emission factor is more sensitive to the generation mix of the country. So this is all about, these are my views on sustainability assessment of electric vehicles in India. So I am really glad to see that TERI is doing a very comprehensive assessment on the same. So I would always suggest that instead of taking crude databases which are available, maybe we can do a study, more deeper study onto whether those values are applicable for Indian conditions also. For example, the manufacturing of lead. Lead contributes around 7. Lead is the main component of a lead acid battery. And so almost 70% of the lead acid battery is lead, the component lead. So we have to actually look into how lead is manufactured in India, how lead is produced in India, and right from how it is produced in India and how it is used for the production of lead acid battery in India. So those values may be different from what is there in standard databases. So maybe at least for components which contribute more to the life cycle assessment components or whatever it is, it is better that we look into the Indian context and then do the work so that it will be more specific to the Indian conditions. So that's what I did in my research. So that is all from my side. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Das, just one clarification.
Yes, sir.
In your research, you have used the four-wheelers,
Yes,
not the
yes.
two-wheelers.
No, no, no. I have done only on a four-wheeler. Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah.
Mm.
Now I turn to Professor Suresh Jain, and then he can share his views. And after that, we will come to Mr. Rao, and then we'll have the internal discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Terry and Souvik, for inviting me. And it's really a great discussion. And I will just have a discussion instead of having a presentation because Souvik have made my life easy. And then the Professor Das also have given lots of numbers. Straightforward, I just jumped into like where the concern when you talk about the typical vehicles what we are using driven through petrol and the diesel or CNG and and when you are comparing with the electric vehicle. So why the electric vehicle is coming in the discussion is definitely one of the most important reason is the emissions. So cities are having lots of air pollution issues, and that's one of the reason if you're going to see that in the Europe, if you're going to see the transition which is happening, and what they are using is the low emission zone basically. And when they are using the low emission zone, basically they are targeting the diesel vehicles or the especially the goods vehicle, because significant or you can say the important contribution to the air quality is the diesel vehicles, and then the goods vehicle is there. And when we are talking about the EV, again, if we are talking only limiting to our EV transition to the passenger vehicles, so again, we may not be solving the entire problem because the significant contribution is from the goods vehicle is there. And that's one of the very important, you can say, finding which comes from the European system where they have more than 320 low emission zone, and where they targeted that wherever the emissions are going down is because of either the diesel vehicles or the goods vehicle, because either they have to move in a very clean technology like the electric vehicle, or they have to go a better hybrid type of things. So what I particularly see when you talk about the two scenarios which Souvik was mentioning, one is the battery issue. Like there are the two important aspects are there when we talk about the electric vehicles, and especially when you talk about the well to wheel. So one is this is there where we are talking about what is the source of power to run the vehicle. So definitely when you talk about the internal combustion engine or the traditional vehicles, so they are running on the fossil fuel based energy, which is really a concern. And second aspect is when you talk about is the end of life of the battery, which is going to create you can say when you compare these two aspects, uh, because of which we are bringing the electric vehicle. So emission point, definitely there is a understanding when you are talking about running the vehicle on road. So definitely there are less emissions, whether you talk about carbon dioxide or air pollution point of view. And especially for the carbon dioxide point of view, you may not be having very significant benefits, but definitely in terms of air quality, there are significant reduction in the pollution is there. But at the same time, when you include the another aspect which is related to the battery, whether you talk about the extraction of the material from the different mining sources, and then you refine the material, and then you are using into the manufacturing of the battery. So this is one additional process. And then after the end of the battery usage in the vehicle, then you can say disposal of the battery in a safe manner. So this is the most important aspect which is coming into the debate to be taken into account when we are doing the life cycle. Why I'm saying this? Because when the Souvik was mentioning about the life cycle, I see that our focus was means it's appearance only. I'm not I'm just giving in a reference so we can also see, like when you talk about the global warming potential, so we are focusing towards some more of GHG emissions, and then we are talking about the particulate matter. But when you talk about the electric batteries, we are more concerned with the toxic chemicals. Even though some of the part of the toxic chemical is definitely a part of the particulate matter characteristics also, but beyond that also, if we are not going to account appropriately their composition, then definitely the trade-off which we are looking in the trade-off analysis also, we may miss the important aspects of this trade-off analysis. So this is very important aspects which I want to bring into this discussion. And secondly, it has been observed that the battery which is used by the vehicle, after its complete life is there in the vehicle itself, I'm not talking about the other purpose. There are research which shows that these batteries can be used for other purposes, like even the household purpose also. So life cycle analysis can taken into account, is there any process which we can bring after the completion of use of that particular battery for a particular vehicle, if we want to have certain type of collection mechanism, and then we can reuse for other purpose, because the power required for the vehicle may not be sufficient enough at that time, but it can give in a lots of power, or you can say energy, for other purposes also. So that angle also we can explore while doing the life cycle analysis. And that's where the circularity is very important aspects to bring into the conditions. And then I see that already when you are talking about the connecting threads, so time being until there is a proper scenario, not talking about in just only in terms of life cycle, because the battery disposal is going to be a major concern. So it has been observed that, like for example, in Europe, the responsibilities are given to the manufacturers, either the vehicle manufacturers or the battery manufacturers. So that is their accountability to take it back after the completion of the, you can say, end of life of that battery, and then they can decide how to use it, whether it can be used for another purpose, or if they can improvise, or having a proper disposal mechanism. So that is also a very important aspect when we are going to do an analysis between the traditional vehicles and the electric vehicles. So these are the important points which I felt is going to be important to bring into the aspect. And definitely the power is going to be in a very important aspect. For example, very importantly, like for example, if I am buying a vehicle, so maybe on the way, if I need the charge, I may be using those power stations where the electric charge facility is given. And I'm assuming if they are running on the solar power or other renewable sources. But if I am charging my vehicle at my home, and which is not empowered by the renewable sources, so again my dependency on the fossil fuel based energy is there. So definitely these, when we are talking about wheel to well to wheel, so source of power means energy, and the end of life of the batteries is going to be an important aspect to be taken into account. Yeah, that's these are the points which I want to highlight. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Suresh. Suresh, I just thought that if we can have some kind of a hybrid vehicle which also have electrical kit, and because normally we have the short distances, then this electric the we can run on a short distances very often and almost daily, but occasionally the long distances can be covered by the either by the diesel or by petrol. Will it be more helpful in Indian conditions?
Sir, yeah, that's where I started from the low emission zone. Actually the purpose of that condition was within the city or where the emissions are very high. For example, definitely typically a central business district or the center of the city. So that is going to be more useful where you have to switch to a cleaner option, whether it is hybrid, which is having also the electric option and the running on the other fuel also. But this is very important to take a appropriate decision. It should not be like when we moved from the incandescent bulb to CFL and then to the LED. because we know the CFL was having, you can say, lots of toxic chemicals, especially the mercury. So it's a huge investment is going to be there in terms of infrastructure, and the auto industry also going to shift from traditional way to the another way. Like for example, recently they moved to the Bharat 6. So it's a huge investment is there. And for the policy perspective, we have to stand somewhere so that everybody should be having some benefit out of this.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Rao,
Yes, sir.
the one thing which we have been discussing, that whether this, apart from the having the electric vehicles, can the retrofitment of the existing ICT vehicles can be done by the retrofitting, so that the transition becomes easier. I request you to consider this while sharing your views.
Yes, sir. Just to respond to what you have asked Dr. Suresh regarding having provision of a diesel or petrol for extending the range of vehicle. We have vehicle configuration, what are called range extenders, where normally it runs on battery, and after a particular limit distance you cover, there is a generator which is housed in the vehicle, a part of the vehicle, which starts charging the battery, so that the vehicle actually power for the vehicle comes from the electric powertrain, but the battery gets recharged through the alternator system which is there in the vehicle. That's called range extender system. So that would be very good vehicle configuration for what Dr. Suresh was mentioning, that in no emission zones we can always use them when you want to go for longer distances. It's a partly on electric drive, and partly it would be, I mean, you would be using IC to generate power for charging the battery. That's also quite popular, especially in Japan and some parts of Europe. I just want to go back, and when government announced the electrification of auto mobility, there were two factors which influenced them to go for this. One was the growth projections of auto industry in India, still being a developing country. All forecasts has shown that by 2026, I mean, I'm talking about pre-COVID projections, the total industry was to grow by almost threefold growth, what was predicted. And then added to that, there was constant issues in terms of quality of air, what we are having in many of the cities. And unfortunately, India has almost 13 cities out of 15 worst polluted in the world. These two factors, plus third, the after effect of this was the huge bill for import of crude, which the government was incurring every year. And if you factor in the growth projected, it would have become unmanageable by 2026-30. So all these factors put together, they went for electrification of mobility, and the assumption was that though initially we would be importing lithium materials for making the battery, but subsequently by recycling the used batteries, we would be extracting getting back lithium, and at one point of time, it would start reducing the import of lithium. That was the thing. And electric vehicles, though in terms of global, GHG gases, it may not be at par as shown by Professor Jani. But the big advantage of electric vehicles is there's no local pollution. One of the major issues what we face because of the automobiles, a lot of studies have said that 30% of the roadside pollution is attributed to automobiles. And so it is very important that that's also controlled, because it impacts the health of all the people who are there. So these were the factors which actually led the government to go for electrification of automobiles. But there are issues, and as Souvik has explained, unless we do the total detailed analysis of life cycle of IC vehicles versus electric vehicles, we will not be very clear how it's impacting us. And also various factors like usage of vehicles, how much distance, which city we are using the vehicles, and how are we generating electricity. All these factors, I mean, it has big influence on the end result, that is, what is the GHG emissions of these two technologies. And now coming to your question about retrofitment, there are lots of startups who have actually developed these kits for retrofitment of three-wheelers, especially because a lot of states are now working on helping their three-wheeler fleets to electric three-wheelers. And a lot of startups are ready with their product, but there are some technical issues related to certification of these kits for different models, and also the incentives which are applicable for, the manufacturing of electric vehicles in terms of subsidy for the battery, etc., are not applicable for retrofitment. As a result, the cost of retrofitment kit is very, very high compared to a new electric three-wheeler which comes out of a factory. So that is another point where there's some government intervention is required. As you rightly said, if retrofitment also happens, then we would be able to phase out the IC vehicles faster. In addition to this, what we discussed the other day was the scrappage policy has to be strengthened so that the old IC vehicles which are polluting, which are not actually complying with the current emission regulations, can be phased out faster, and that would also help cleaning up the automobiles, and we would be able to increase the penetration of electric vehicles into the system.
Thank you, Mr. Rao.
Sir, here, sir, I have one more point. Dr. Suresh also mentioned about heavy goods carriers. Whatever studies I have analyzed, at this juncture, most of the countries are not going for electrification for heavy-duty vehicles. Because the size of the battery and weight of the battery system on the vehicle actually eats into the so-called payload capacity of the vehicle. And also the swapping type of arrangement for heavy-duty vehicles will become very, very difficult because of sheer size of the battery. So, generally the discussions are that either fuel cell, whenever the green hydrogen generation becomes viable, and also the fuel cell becomes comes to manufacturing stage, that is a better application for heavy duty vehicles. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now we have with us Dr. Mamta Mahapatra. She is a Senior Principal Scientist, Associate Professor in CSIR. I request her to share her views.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Hope I am audible.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, actually, sorry, I just attended during my travel schedule, so therefore I could not able to attend it from beginning. I am basically involved in the recycling area, and what we understand that currently in India, the recycling sector getting the flow of this waste battery and waste stream of electronic other battery including lithium ion battery also is very difficult to make it any business venture, or also there is the data which actually needed to start all these kind of things from very beginning to a business model is not available at all. Just today morning only I have met to Dr. Peri Shami of Partharsarathy of this e-Parisara founder. He also is feeling like that in country like India, it is really is a dream to set up all kind of this waste stream in a very inline to the market. If you'll see the business sector, also whatever really the material flow for every state, it's not only state from village to all this area where we could not able to reach. Also there are a lot of electronic waste including battery waste. As if you know, the e-waste and battery waste both are in the different, it is already defined by Government of India. So these are the things we need to first collect all the informations first. Then like us, we like the scientific community, they want to develop lot of process where we generate two types of things. One is our let's say precursor material to cook the to make the battery electrode material, and another thing is we have to set some recycling method where we can cook directly regenerate the electrode material like cathode and anode from this waste stream. These are very challenging as of now. Though some company, they are telling that they are developing it very amicably. Hello.
Please continue.
Yeah. So this is the thing like depending on the heterogeneity of the battery chemistry, as well as many companies, they are all this their chemistry and the battery source material. The starting material itself is a big challenge to get to understand what kind of process is need for a homogeneous solutions.
She's on mute, I think.
Hello. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, Mamta,
Yeah.
we can hear you now.
Yeah. So this is like as a scientist, it, view is like that any related to e-waste stream and the research, it should come under one umbrella where we can connect to each other, starting from data mining to supply chain to material flow to recycling methods and to connecting the industry. That should come under one umbrella, and we should get connected to each other to get the real you can say the electrode material first, and then the battery chemistry. Like for EV sector, as of now lithium ion is already in the market, but we need to understand other battery chemistry which can be indigenously developed in India, in our Indian system also, Indian environment also. So this is like some of the views I need to put over here, and maybe after 15-20 minutes I will able to present this once I will reach in the guest house. So please continue. Hello.
Yes, Mamta?
Yeah. Sir, please continue. I'm just traveling, so I'll reach another 10 minutes. I'll present some of my slides.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Now we have also Mr. Amit Bhatt, who is the India Managing Director, International Council on Clean Transportation. Mr. Bhatt.
Thanks a lot, Shri Prakash sir. I think one of the things which I wanted to share a little bit with the audience is the fact that we often keep hearing that, especially for electric vehicles, that should we really look at EV when the grid is not that clean, and especially when the bulk of the electricity is coming from fossil fuel based sources. And so we did a research on looking at two vehicular segment, which are the bus vehicle segment, one the two-wheelers and another the four-wheeler segment. And the research found that even with the current grid, which is predominantly based on fossil fuel, two-wheelers on a life cycle cost assessment and life cycle emission assessment were found to be anywhere between 30 to 50% less emitting than their conventional internal combustion engine part. And for cars, that number was anywhere between 20 to 30%. So the main takeaway was that that while predominantly the current grid is predominantly powered through fossil fuel, but we now have a pathway to clean the grid, and that is by the renewable uptake. So, and even with the current scenario, the vehicle which are running on electricity as a fuel, these electric vehicles are much cleaner than conventional counterparts. And with the growing uptake of renewables, these will get more and more cleaner. And so that is one important thing I want to bring this to audience, because, and I've seen many times that when we talk about EV, there's a response, but then we get energy from coal. So why should we look at electric mobility?
Yeah, I agree with you, particularly in the context that our cities are highly polluted and the air pollution is a major problem. And at least one immediate advantage is that if we have the electric vehicles flying in the cities, then the contribution to the air pollution would be lesser to a large extent. Now, there are a number of the questions which we can take one by one, and some of them have been already answered relating to, like, say, one was relating to this, that if the most of the energy in the India is produced by coal, then why should have the electric vehicles? Now, the one of the concerns with our participants has is that the availability of the material, for the lithium ion batteries, and that Soubhik also mentioned in his presentation, and there could be some other the solutions like methanol, using methanol as energy carrier through, say, methanol reformer fuel cell for electric vehicles. Then how far this will be able to replace the lithium ion cell? Soubhik?
Hello, sir, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So availability of materials is something which is definitely very important from the perspective of a holistic transition towards electric vehicle. If I look at the the transition in terms of the fuel dependency of economy, of the Indian economy. So over the years, it has been largely like crude oil and natural gas, which we still continue to import. Uh, then we move towards the renewable energy, which is solar. And although we do have a decent cell manufacturing capacity in the country, we still continue to import solar cells. Uh, obviously, like as we move towards this 500 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity, we would be able to use that one. But when it comes to the critical materials, which largely is the lithium and related chemistries and the permanent magnets, although there has been, in fact, today there was a news that IIT Madras, I think, have come up with a technology which will reduce the overall yes,
zinc air.
Zinc, yeah. So and including there are dependency on reducing the content of permanent magnets in motors, which are definitely very encouraging in terms of making more these technologies commercially available, and not so much dependency would be there on the imported materials. But more importantly, it is to see that how these different technologies evolve, because Dr. Mahapatra very importantly highlighted the aspect of availability of technology on one side and its adoption by the commercial enterprises, because it is the products which we are going to use would be produced by the commercial entities. So we might be talking all these things, but ultimately the availability of the technology would be available through a product. And if that product is not viable, obviously we might have a technology, a solution, but that solution can't be converted into something which is available to us. I think that is where the conducive policy environment would facilitate to a large extent in terms of how we can align some of these players in the value chain to think in that direction, because ultimately we are achieving towards that larger goal. While there might be focus on looking at other options, definitely those different options would play an important role. But at least in the long term, I think one or two technologies would be the game changer, or would be the primary one that will kind of drive future sustainability.
Okay. Now Jani, this during your research, you have done a lot of calculations, emissions calculation at the manufacturing stage. Can there be can we develop a calculator, emission calculator for the various operations at the manufacturing stage, so that it can be controlled, and the manufacturer themselves can control the emission once they know that this is the area which requires more attention?
Definitely, sir. Actually, the database can be made into the form of some software or something like that, where if you want to develop a product, that is something similar to SEMA Pro. Actually, they have used the database SEMA Pro. So something like SEMA Pro can be done for Indian context also. And as sir mentioned, it can be given to anybody who want to manufacture something, and he can find out the amount of emissions, the predicted amount of emissions, provided he knows the amount of materials that goes into the production of that particular component. So that is because as the database is there, we can of course create a calculator sort of thing, where you can calculate and find out how much emissions will be generated from the manufacturing, material production, any stage is possible, so that you can predict before. Yeah, sir.
So this calculator would be able to give the carbon footprint of
Yes.
the incoming materials, but
Yes.
actual manufacturing of the vehicles, the carbon intensity of that will depend upon what is the process each manufacturer is following.
Yes.
Because every manufacturer is their own processes and technology which is deployed. Yes. So the carbon footprint of actual manufacturing of each OEM will be different based on what is the automation levels they are using?
Yes.
What is the different processes they are using for various stages of
Yes,
manufacture?
yes. So it can be customized for a particular area or a particular manufacturing industry or a process where you have a database,
Yes.
you can do whatever you want. Sir, as you mentioned, it is different from industry to industry. One EV manufacturer may be using a particular framework, the other one may not be using the same thing. So it can be customized. Definitely, it can be customized, and you can predict how much GHG emissions will be there once you manufacture a EV, and say at what stage consumes more energy, at what stage there is more emission. You can find it out, and then of course you can do the measures. You can take the measures beforehand so that it can be reduced after it is manufactured. That is possible.
Okay, thank you. Now I turn to Mamta. Mamta, you have worked on the recycling of the batteries, etc. Now how this can be, because this to me it looks like a very grave problem, that how these batteries can be recycled or can be reused. Do you have some easy method by which these mountains of those batteries can be easily diminished?
The first of all, the battery getting battery means as a precursor material in for the recycling industry is really a difficult task and also challenge nowadays. As you know, many international players they are hold of this business, so that in India, even if some of the recycler, though they struggling and they have settled their industry for recycling the things, they are not getting the battery too much, because most of the unorganized sectors are now in the market, in Indian market. They are controlling in their business in different way. So the authentic recycler, they are not getting the battery. So even if they have set up also, their per day or per year tons of requirement is not fulfilling. Therefore, that is one challenge in this sector to get the material. Secondly, once it will be come from, if you are seeing in the recycling sector, they are adopting two methods. One is pyrometallurgical method, where the your carbon footprint is very high, and even if like Umicore and other this is Lycycle at UK, Umicore at Belgium. These are the standard company who are into this business, and they are getting they are controlled towards carbon footprint is not as of like as the standard protocols, because they are adopting this pyrometallurgical method most of the time. And in the hydrometallurgical method, the aqueous stream is a problem, because as you know, in lithium ion battery, the fluoride is one of the solvent. Fluoride content is there, but in this fluoride also in aqueous stream, nobody is reporting that. These are very in societal point of view also, it is a responsibilities of scientists and engineer as well as industrialists to make all this point need to be addressed. And in India, if you see, the complete recycling industry has not been set up till yet. Only they have gone up to the black mass generation. After that, setting up the other unit operations, like let's say pyrometallurgy or hydrometallurgical unit operations, they are not getting that much amount of material which they think of for that business. Again, the scientific challenges are there. We are not getting so much purified product to go for a remanufacturing of battery. So these studies should continue for maybe another few years in R&D level to set the material certification, what we are getting the recycled material, and also the process, whether we are adopting a process which is value adding to get this recycled product. Otherwise, just doing R&D and just getting the data will now use in the future energy sector of our Indian stream. And also, if you'll see the lithium ion, also the chemistry is changing day by day. Every month, they are coming with new technology. Tesla and other big companies, they are working for new technology. So therefore, these are the things which we'll need to address, and life cycle analysis depends on the how we are getting the authentic data. Even if from manufacturing side, each unit operation, what exactly they are adapting the method, what is the greenhouse emission, that data, getting the data is also a difficult task. Even if from government sector also, we need to we make a path so that we'll get all this data from them. Because I visited just yesterday Well, they have set up a lithium ion battery manufacturing sector for specifically aerospace grade battery with this ISRO technology. They have lot of unit operations, and evaluating each unit operation also, it is like you can visit and you can talk to them, but to get the data needs some needs some channel, so that you will get all the data for life cycle assessment of both for sector as well as for the manufacturing sector.
Okay, thank you. Suresh, are there any limitations of LCA as a measure of sustainability?
Only the thing is that, sir, like when I mentioned the how you are accounting and what component you are accounting, right? And what Sovik rightly mentioned, upstream, downstream, or the middle path. So what component you are accounting, and then you compare with the other, you can say, conventional process, right? So this is the most important part, and what you are including, like uh, everybody is saying now, like what type of you can say toxic chemicals are there, how much is there. If you don't know about that and looking into the indigenous conditions, how the manufacturing is going to happen, so definitely your interpretation might be different. So and moreover, like a life cycle will give you a potential only. It's not like directly going to be a risk or the directly the impact. So in terms of potential, yes, it given a direction, but definitely we have to smartly interpret the results when we are going to compare. But at the same time, I just want to highlight one quick inputs. I got a message today from one of the Greenco group. They are working in the renewable energy, and they recently have a MOU with the CMET Hyderabad, and he was mentioning that this institute have developed the technology for recycling of e-waste, especially the lithium-ion batteries, and even he was mentioning about that the circuit board also, so for the PCB. So I think there may be the means things are coming where we get the solutions, and hopefully the transition may help.
Oh, thank you. Amit,
Sir,
the
sir, I just want to add, sir, I just want to add what Dr. Suresh has said. We have visited a organization in Roorkee, Atero, which has developed the whole process of extracting all these materials from spent batteries. And on the other side, the government has issued a draft notification for the end of life recycling of used batteries. And as Dr. Suresh was mentioning, they have made the vehicle manufacturers responsible for tracking the batteries, and because from the vehicle, the battery is likely to go for a secondary use of lighting or stationary application. So it is the responsibility of the manufacturer to trace the batteries and also make sure that it goes for recycling. Of course, it's in a draft stage, still not actually notified.
Okay, before we finish, last question to Amit is that why should we go for these private individual vehicles? Let us promote those public transportation, which is much more beneficial than pushing for the private electric vehicles. Amit?
Absolutely, sir. I think if we look at the whole modal split profile of any city, the majority of people are either walking, cycling, or using public transport. So I think electrification of public transport is happening. With the recently concluded CSL tender, we got some very aggressive rates for electric buses. And I think now it's time to scale up and maybe look at a much larger fleet of buses. And the reason why it will be really important is that if you look at India-wise, most of the state transport undertakings are in losses. And a lot of it is because of their intra-city operation. And so fares are low, there is big competition from two-wheeler segment, and therefore cost recovery is on the lower side. With electric vehicle buses, I think there's two things. One, I think the fuel cost, which is substantive cost for these agencies, gets substantively reduced. And so it's a win-win for it. And the other thing is because of the electric buses, the quality of service is much, much better. No noise, no vibration. And so it's a different quality of service. So I think absolutely we should focus on converting, at least in the cities, in the urban transport area, the buses to electric, and also look at paratransit, like 2-3-wheelers also to electric. That should be a good start for looking at decarbonizing transport, especially in the cities areas.
Thank you very much, Amit. Now I go to Savik for his concluding remarks.
Thank you, sir. Definitely, the suggestions and the discussions have been extremely value-adding from the perspective of the completeness of the findings of the study and making it more relevant. So just want to just take what Suresh mentioned in terms of differentiating the entire pollution into a number of parameters. So CO2 definitely is one of the very important aspect from the global warming potential. Equally important is the particulate, which is the local pollution, which is having the health impacts, the local health impacts. So if we see a kind of a decline in both the pollutants, the global pollution and the local pollution, and particularly in places where there is a lot of density of people living, it is very much desirable, and that has been one of the primary reasons behind pushing the electric vehicle. But the fact is that when we have more than two parameters to take into consideration, like water consumption, ecotoxicity, human health, and so on and so forth, the real challenge is that how do we compare A with B, with C, with D, and so on and so forth. Now, a specific technology might be performing extremely well in 2 or 3 parameters, but that technology may not be performing well maybe in some of the other parameters. Now, that is where I think some inherent biasness come in terms of our interpretation and the researchers community's interpretation, in terms of the interpretation by the commercial, the government. So I think the real challenge would be how do we harmonize all these interpretation into something which is very unique and acceptable to all. And by taking cue of what was discussed, I think one of the best ways would be to normalize maybe these different indicators which are in different units. Because unless and until we are able to come up with that single indicator, possibly we won't be able to really prioritize that one. And this is something which is being used by many organizations in health products, in food products, products. They are using those different parameters. So I think from that perspective, if we are able to harmonize it and come up with it, then it will really add value from the interpretation perspective and making it more realistic. The second aspect is with regard to the suggestions made in terms of the data availability. it is indeed a very challenge because we have so many stakeholders. The stakeholders in the upstream who are tier 2, tier 3 manufacturers, they have assemblers and the energy going into assembly, then the use phase, and within the use phase we have the users, different kind of users, and then we have the replacement of materials periodically, because we are also trying to capture the maintenance part, and more importantly the distance which is covered throughout their entire lifetime. So I think bringing all these parameters with all these scenarios of fuel technologies is sometimes challenging, but the real outcome, and we are very excited about to see that end matrix that will help us to provide a kind of a heat map of all the outcomes and the levers that can in fact improve the different fuel technologies to the decarbonization. That's the idea that I have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sobi. Back to Deepa.
With that, we come to the conclusion of the webinar. The discussions today have effectively underlined the significance of life cycle assessment in evaluating the sustainable performance of electric vehicles. A key takeaway message from the panel has been that there's a critical requirement for a holistic approach to sustainability assessment of EVs. It is now indeed my privilege to express gratitude on behalf of TERI to all the distinguished speakers for joining us for the event and sharing their expertise. Our heartfelt thanks to Ms. Urda Ashos, Project Director NDC-TIA GIZ, for sharing her thoughts and viewpoints. Our sincere gratitude to the GIZ e-mobility team led by Dr. Indradeep Mitra for collaborating with TERI and commitment towards implementation of the LCA study, as well as the Digital Library on Green Mobility platform. I would like to thank Director General TERI, Dr. Vibha Dhawan, for inspiring and encouraging us constantly for all our project activities related to EVs. Our thanks to Mr. Sri Prakash, Distinguished Fellow TERI, for constantly guiding us for implementing the LCA study as well as the Green Mobility platform. Our gratitude to the project teams of the LCA study led by Mr. Shouvik Bhattacharya, Senior Fellow and Associate Director TERI, as well as the Digital Library on Green Mobility team led by Dr. P.K. Bhattacharya, Senior Fellow and Associate Director TERI. A big thank you to everyone at TERI, including the events team, IT, communications, web development teams, working behind the scene to put today's event together. Finally, thank you to all the participants for joining this event. With these words, we come to the end of today's event. Have a good day.